Welcome back, guys. This is going to be a very interesting video. I want to do a video, and I guess to go back and explain what my thought process behind this video is. It's going to end up being kind of a basics of the business of leasing. This started because Prime introduced a new feature on the Prime mobile app, and we'll get to that. But this new feature helps you understand a concept called net fuel cost. And net fuel cost is something that I have paid attention to quite a bit. And you've always been able to access the net fuel cost, but Prime has changed the way you can access the net fuel cost and has also given you some additional information that they never used to give you on net fuel cost. And I initially was just going to do a video on net fuel cost, what it is, why it's important. And the more I was thinking about net fuel cost, the more I thought, I really need to give all the information and the basics of, and I know I've done how does leasing work. I've gone through an entire settlement sheet, but this is more of, and I want it to not be so in depth that it turns people off in terms of a business. First of all, I'm not good at math. I'm going to throw that out there. I am not as a person who leases a truck, you are a business. You are an independent contractor. You are considered not an employee. You are considered an independent contractor who's running a business. And as I said in that settlement video, the How Does Leasing Work video, at the end of a payroll period, Prime settles up with your business. Now, you can be an individual, but even as an individual, you're technically, you're an independent contractor. You can be a sole proprietor. You can be a limited liability corporation. You can be incorporated. You can do whatever it is you want from a business standpoint, but you are a separate entity from Prime. And understanding how you can best run your business in terms of maximizing your profit. When you're a employee, it is your employer's job to understand maximizing profits, to dictate things like fuel savings, things like that. So we get back to fuel. And this all started, like I said, with fuel. And miles per gallon is obviously something a lot of folks are familiar with just from driving their personal vehicle, whether it's your vehicle does 25 miles per gallon and it displays, current miles per gallon for the tank, whatever. But miles per gallon is not the be-all, end-all of running a successful business. It's a component of being able to, and controlling your miles per gallon, your fuel efficiency is all, and I've talked about this before, controlling the way you drive, the RPMs that you shift at if you have a manual transmission truck. And again, Prime is switching over to automated manuals, so automatic trucks. Your maximum speed that you go. And again, company trucks governed at 58 miles an hour on the pedal, 62 on cruise control, and lease trucks at 65 miles an hour. Does not mean you have to drive at that particular speed. But whatever speed you drive, however you drive the truck, how aggressively you drive the truck is going to dictate your fuel efficiency in terms of miles per gallon. And let's start with miles per gallon. I personally use an app. Prime will track your miles per gallon, your fuel efficiency for you, but I use an app, and I use an app called Simply Auto. And we're going to get, I have a background in radio and television. If you haven't watched some of my other videos, I spent 17 years in radio and dabbled a little bit in TV. I did go to college for radio and TV. And I have been surprisingly unsophisticated with my editing on my YouTube videos. And I'm going to try to rectify that right now. So Simply Auto is the app that I use. And I'm going to try and roll in just a screenshot of the Simply Auto app. And just kind of show you how I track. And the first section, as it comes on screen here, is each fill up, and each fill up, as you anyone who's tracked miles per gallon, of course, put in your odometer, you put in how many gallons you purchase, and then you put in the cost to figure out how much money you're spending. And with all that information, this app breaks things down for you. And first of all, you can see on there that my fuel efficiency is 7.95 miles per gallon. Doesn't sound all that great, but it actually is pretty decent. The fleet average, I believe, is around 7.5, at least as far. And when Prime talks about fleet average, fleet is not the entire fleet of Prime. Fleet is your fleet manager. So amongst all the trucks in Decatur Bellevue, it's around 7.5. So mine is slightly above that. For simplicity's sake, I mentioned I am not the best mathematician on the face of the earth. I'm going to call it 8. It's a little bit easier that way. So then that second page that you saw roll in talks about how much money you're spending on fuel. And you can see that I'm spending, over the course of, I've been tracking this vehicle for approximately 6 months, a little over 6 months. It boils down to $82 per day that I spend on fuel. So that's a good piece of information to have. And this is where we start combining net fuel cost and the business of leasing. So net fuel cost, basically, it's a real simple formula. It's how much money did you spend on fuel? Add it all up. They include diesel exhaust fluid, DEF, DEF, in that total. They do not include fuel tax, just so you know. But you take that amount, and then a portion of your pay for each trip, and this is all on the leasing side, this is not anything to do with company drivers, but a portion of your pay is what's called the fuel surcharge. I've talked about the fuel surcharge before. Fuel surcharge started back when diesel prices started to escalate $3, $4, $5 a gallon several years ago. It started as a concept where the companies that are purchasing items will help contribute to pay for some of the cost of diesel fuel. So you take the amount of money you spent on fuel, you subtract the total fuel surcharge, and then you divide it by the total miles that you drove, and you get a figure that's called your net fuel cost. It's how much you're actually spending out of pocket above the amount you're being compensated in the fuel surcharge. So the fuel surcharge is not designed to totally cover your fuel cost. It's designed, back before diesel started to escalate, there was no such thing as a fuel surcharge. Now, that said, you can have a negative net fuel surcharge. My apologies. You can have a negative net fuel cost. And that's what I have. And that means you are spending less on fuel than the amount you're being compensated with the fuel surcharge. And that's where you get back into fuel efficiency. So I'm going to roll in a couple of things. Prime's old format, and we're going to start with Prime's old format, was, and I've talked about macros. Macros are pre-formatted messages that you can send in. One of the pre-formatted messages is a payroll request. For whatever reason, when you get your payroll or your settlement sheet emailed to you, if you get it through email, it does not have your net fuel cost on there. So you have to specifically request it separately to have this, and it's on the bottom. So we're going to roll that in right now, and you can see that it's negative 4.6, and then it's a 4-week average of negative 1. So it's 0.04, 0.01. So it obviously goes dollars, tenths to, so it's negative 4 cents, negative 1 cent over the course of 4 weeks. Now it's important to note a 1-week average can be deceiving, and that's why the 4-week average is in there. And I'm going to show you the new system, which doesn't have the 4-week average yet. That's still being developed on the Prime app. But the reason that a 1-week average is good but not great is at the end of payroll, and the payroll I've talked about before goes Tuesday to Tuesday from Central Time, 4 o'clock to 4 o'clock. So 4 o'clock to 4:01, or 4:01 to 4 o'clock, however you want to look at it. If you've got half a tank of fuel at 4 p.m. on Tuesday, the system doesn't have a way to pretend that half a tank of fuel doesn't exist. So if you have 80 gallons in there, or 90 gallons in your tank that you paid for the previous week, well, that's just 80 or 90 gallons that you don't have to pay for the following week. And let's say at the end of that payroll period, you only have a quarter of a tank of fuel. So maybe you have 50 gallons, 40 gallons in your tank. That 40 to 50 gallons that you paid for the previous week is going to show that you spent less despite using more fuel. So a 1-week average will be slightly off, which is why the 4-week average is in there, because obviously over a 4-week period, there's still going to be maybe a 50-gallon, and it might not even be 50 gallons, and it might be the other way. It might be that you purchase 50 gallons more because you started the week with a quarter of a tank, and you ended the week with a half a tank. So you purchased an extra 50 gallons over the course of the week that you used the following week. So the hope is that over the 4 weeks that it balances out a little bit more. So that's why there's the 1 week at negative 4 cents and the 4 week at negative 1 cent. Now here's the new, and I'll roll that screen capture in, and it's the new system. And it's not all that different. It still gives the same information. It's the 1 week of the negative 4 cents. But what is really nice is they give you where you stand. And as you can see, it's a ranking, and there's color coded to it. Green, dark green, medium green, and that's where you rank. So 18th is the 18th best net fuel cost out of 270 trucks in the tanker division at Prime. So that's the new system that they have, and they're going to eventually put the 4-week average on there. But I really like that. I really like the ability to see how you do, and you'll get that updated once a week, and those come out on Thursday, which is the day that your settlement sheet gets added. But what I wanted to go to and talk about with net fuel cost and miles per gallon fuel efficiency is how dramatically, first of all, I'm at a negative, we'll call it negative 1 cent. We'll talk about the 4-week average. And the negative 4 cent for the 1-week average. I spent I bought 195, or I used, 195.7 gallons. That's what I purchased, 195.7 gallons over that week. It's a little deceptive to look at what I purchased. For 1,824 miles, and this is where I'm going to go with that's what it was for that week, 1,824 miles. At 8 miles per gallon, you can go and you can figure out how much fuel I actually did use, and I used 228 gallons. So you can see there was a difference of 237 gallons there. And that's what I was talking about, where if you purchase some extra or have some left in the tank. So I spent about $570 actually on fuel, whereas if you look at the fuel, I spent $500 on fuel. So because I actually used a little bit more based on the 30 extra gallons, it would have been $530 or $570. Now, when you're starting to talk about fuel efficiency, if I were getting 7.5, which again is the fleet average, I would have had to use an extra 15.2 gallons of fuel over the course of the week, which is an extra $38. Not a huge deal, but if I got 7 miles per gallon instead of 8, I would have spent another $42. So all of a sudden, you're up to an extra $80 in a given week by getting 7 miles per gallon instead of 8 miles per gallon. Okay, well, what does that translate to? Over the course of a year, you're talking about an extra $4,160 I would have spent on fuel. I wouldn't have a negative net fuel cost. I would have had to take money out of, and I'm using take money out of in the concept of it would have cost me the extra money. The money wouldn't have come out of the fuel surcharge. It would have come out of my profits. So that's where net fuel cost, that's where fuel efficiency is such a big deal. And that's where when people complain about slow trucks, first of all, I drive 65 everywhere I go. Well, I shouldn't say 62 to 65 everywhere I go, on highways that have a speed limit of 65 or greater. 62 to 65 is what I go. If I need to get there, if it's time sensitive, I'll go 65. If I'm not in as much of a hurry, I'll go 62, 63. And that gets me 8 miles per gallon. There are guys that will go slower than that. There are guys that don't care, go 65 everywhere. Maybe they're getting the 7.5. Maybe they're getting the 7. Maybe they shift more aggressively. I shift at 1,200 RPMs every single time. So there are some guys that rev the engine all the way up to 1,600 RPM and shift there, and they're using extra fuel doing that. So that's the success of business. And I could do another video on fixed costs and variable costs and how you can break down and whatnot, but this video is already getting long. But that is something that if you're coming to Prime and you want the variable costs changes, to touch on this real quick, that's the whole point. Fixed costs stay the same. Every week, it's going to be the same number. Your variable costs change, but the biggest variable cost that changes and that you can control is your fuel. And if you can get 8 miles per gallon or better, and again, if I can do better than 8 miles per gallon, that just makes that -4, -1 go even lower. And and there's the other thing is, right now it's at -1, -4. I've had weeks where it's -8. I've had weeks where it was -25. That was a real strange, kind of weird situation. That the way that can happen is if you get a -25 net fuel cost, is if you only fuel, say, 50 gallons, because you already had basically a full tank from the previous week, and then you get a load that has a decent amount of net fuel or a fuel surcharge on it, so you can get a significantly low. So if you, let's say you had 3/4 of a tank left over from the previous week, you run 1 or 2 loads, so you only have to top off your fuel tank. So you're going to have maybe a couple $100 that are going to well more than cover the $50 gallons, maybe 100 gallons that you have to add in fuel. You're going to end up with something silly like a -25 net fuel cost. But that's not indicative of really what you're doing, and that's why I say that 4-week average is much more realistic for what you're producing. But I hope this helps as far as how to be successful as a lease operator, how you can make sure you make money. Fuel is what you can control. You can't control your mileage charge. You can't control you can to some extent control your tolls. You can't control, repairs, unless you know how to do some of the stuff that you need to do on the truck. You can't control the lease cost of the truck. You can't control the insurance and the taxes, but you can control your fuel. And if you can figure out a way to get the best fuel mileage that you're capable of getting, you're just simply putting money in your pocket. And it's like I said, I'm not great at math, but I'm able to figure this out. I'm able to look at the numbers. I hope I've helped you figure some of this stuff out. I do want to make a note, and this is the first video that I'm talking about it. I have created a new email address. Anybody that has questions, you can send it to the email. I'll put the link in the description. It's going to be johnogrenprime@gmail.com. And of course, as always, in the link in the description, you'll find that link if you want to apply to come to Prime. But I hope all this made sense. I hope all of this was helpful if you are already at Prime, or if you're thinking about leasing and understanding why Prime trucks are governed at 65 on the lease side. And just because you're a company driver, that's why they're governed at 62 on cruise control, 58 on the pedal, because Prime is trying to spend as little amount on fuel as possible. The less they're spending on fuel, the more they're able to put into salaries and amenities and insurance benefits and that sort of thing. So my apologies for the length of this video. I knew it was going to be somewhat difficult to keep it concise. Hope you did enjoy it. Again, if you do have questions, I'm going to try and put that email address in all of my older videos so that folks can send me questions. Obviously, you can always put a question in the comment section down below as well. And hope you enjoy. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll talk to you again next time.